Well, I guess we're ready to begin this one. I'm Bill McCollum. I'm a partner with Denton's, and I'm not supposed to be up here today, but Thurbert Baker, who is my partner, had a little problem with a plane that had to land in Dulles instead of Reagan this morning, and so I'm the substitute, former Attorney General of Florida. And we have as our guests today two of, not my colleagues now, but I feel almost like they are because I was Attorney General for a while, as you know. First of all, we have Jason Miyares, who's General Miyares, who's the Attorney General of Virginia. He's one of the most junior, maybe the most junior Attorney General.
I'm the freshman.
You're the freshman, yeah, that's right, with 1 year. And then from Maryland, we have General Brian Frosh, and he's pretty senior, not the most senior, but he's about to retire after 2 terms. So of the group here, you're the most senior.
I'm still a Frosh.
That's right, you're still a freshman. Yeah, I got it. Clever.
Glad to be here.
Well, we want to talk today with you about the role of the Attorney General. I'm not about to go into it, but I started teaching a class at the University of Florida, a compressed course on the role. And it's once you start doing that, you realize how big that role is. So we can't begin to cover all of that today. But the thing that's on our minds first and foremost this morning, I think for most people, still the residuals from the opioid settlements that just happened. They are the number one item in civil that people think of with you fellows. First, I'll start with you, Jason. You had recently a major dollar amount that you recovered for Virginia. Can you tell us how that's being used and what your resources are?
Yeah, I mean, Virginia, every state was impacted by this, but in particular in Southwest Virginia was devastated by the opioid epidemic. And so collectively over $500 million in settlements they're going to come to the Commonwealth of Virginia. We just received a $67 million payment. And the idea is it doesn't come to my office. We set up, a lot of states have set up something similar, an opioid abatement authority, which is going to be grant funding to help those dealing with in that cycle of addiction. And so the idea is it goes towards the people that need the help the most. And we're proud of the work we've done. There's a lot of hats we wear as AGs. Consumer protection is one of them. I'm proud of the work that we're doing and continue to do in this area.
Well, one of the things connected to the opioid settlement that comes to my mind, maybe partly because of Florida, and every state's laws are different. I think most of the audience understands that. But the cities and the counties generally across the country sued over this, as well as the Attorney General, and were a lot of issues related to that. I understand your laws are a little different in Virginia, so I'm going to ask General Frosh about this, but what complications does that present for you with all the cities and the counties? Do they have the right to sue in Maryland? Is it a constitutional right? Is there a parens patriae or a public nuisance issue in Maryland?
So we have strong county government in Maryland, and the counties and cities have the right to sue on their own. And it's very complicated when you're in litigation with 49 other states and you're trying to settle. If you're just suing them all by yourself and the counties and cities are suing them, I guess, the chips fall where they may. But in order to settle the cases, and this was particularly true of the distributors, the 3 big distributors wanted peace, and they wanted peace universally. And it was our responsibility to bring the cities and counties on board. And it was a very complicated negotiation, but ultimately we were able to get everybody except Baltimore City and its school district to join the settlement.
Well, what happens with Baltimore? They're still in litigation?
They're suing.
Still doing it?
Yes.
Well, in my state of Florida right now, General Moody, you may be aware, has sued over this because she settled for the 3 government entities that wouldn't. And now there's a court action involving whether she had the right to do that, and she's arguing that parens patriae only goes to the Attorney General, and public nuisance doctrine they can't use, which they did, and so forth.
See, in Virginia, we have the Dillon Rule. We're a Dillon Rule state, which any authority the localities have has to be granted by the General Assembly, which, doing a plug, if you're a business, it's one more reason to relocate to Virginia because we have much clearer sight lines for how our businesses can operate.
And in Maryland, if I could just add, the Attorney General doesn't have common law power. So whatever ability we have to sue is either given to us by the governor or by the General Assembly.
That's right. That's one of the examples of why the states are all different. When I teach this course, it's fascinating to look at. Unfair and deceptive trade practice laws are kind of the bread and butter of what people think of in the business community when they think of the Attorney General's office. Can you tell us, each of you, what your, if you can, without revealing any trade secrets, what your current priorities are, or what you think are most come to mind in areas where this is used as a tool by the Attorney General's office? I think every state has them.
I'll let you tackle.
General
Yeah,
Frosh?
sure. Well, look, I mean, our priorities are to get the biggest bang for our bucks. I mean, if we see conduct that's really terrible, that impacts lots of people, that's at the top of our list. And I could give you dozens of examples, but let me try one that's not the biggest case in the world, but that made my head explode when I found out about it. There are factoring companies that buy settlements, structured settlements from individuals. And in Maryland, there was one company in particular that was targeting lead paint victims. If you're very lucky, if you're a lead paint victim, you're cognitively impaired by definition. And if you're very lucky, you find somebody to represent you. You're a kid almost all the time when this is diagnosed. And if you're even luckier, then the lawyer who's representing you gets a settlement. And almost always, because they're kids, the settlements are structured annuities so that the individual who is very unlikely to be able to earn a living for the rest of his or her life gets payments, usually until the time they're eligible for Social Security. And this one company in particular was looking for lead paint settlements and calling the victims. Freddie Gray, if you remember that name, was somebody who died in police custody famously in Baltimore. And he was one of those kids. He was a lead paint victim. He got a settlement. I think the net present value of one of his annuities was $94,000. They called him up. I don't know exactly what they said, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, Freddie, you're getting $1,000 a month. I'll give you a bunch of money right now. You want to buy a car? You want to go to Vegas? I'll give you cash." It's very hard for somebody who is not cognitively impaired to do the actuarial calculation of what the difference is between the cash and the payment over 50 years. They bought one of his annuities for $18,000 that had a net present value of $98,000. And overall, this company had paid $6 million for hundreds of settlements that had a net present value of $21 million. And they did it through a series of misrepresentations. And that one made my head explode. We went after those guys. We are still hoping to achieve full restitution for all of the victims.
Well, that was one of the pleasures of being Attorney General. You could go after the really bad guys who do things that are bad. And I think many of the businesses who are partners in the U.S. Chamber and Institute for Legal Reform are concerned that the ordinary, regular business is getting the short end of it. One of them, General Miyares, has complained recently, particularly about the fact that there's no set way to determine sometimes what the violations are. So UDAP, or unfair and deceptive trade practice, I don't know what it's like in your state, but most of it, you have a dollar amount, $1,000, $1,500 or whatever per violation. And then how you calculate it's an issue. Have you run into issues, have you seen that?
Well, I mean, I would say that, my general attitude, for the business community is one, I want to work with you, not against you in general. You're poverty destroyers. That's what you do. You do more to alleviate poverty than any government program. That is, empirical data shows that. And so I've said before that the most important words a human being can hear in their life, other than hearing "I love you," is "you're hired." So my attitude is we should always have a regulatory framework that makes it easier to say those magical words. Those are transformative. However, you could have two truths at the same time. I want businesses to thrive and hire people. But if businesses are not being good corporate actors and they're taking advantage of people, then part of my role as Attorney General is, a previous AG once said, you kind of have to view yourself as the people's protector. And that's part of our job. And part of that is holding people accountable when they are using deceptive practices, when they are taking advantage of individuals. So if you're a good corporate actor, great. I want to work with you and have you thrive and hire people. If not, we're going to hold you accountable. But all of that goes to say is I think it's important. The one thing I've experienced meeting with so many people in the business world is taxes they can deal with is an uncertain regulatory and litigation climate that they despise. And so one of the things that we try to have is a consistent level playing field in Virginia, which is one more reason why businesses should look at relocating into the Commonwealth. Not that I'm doing any shameless plug on behalf of Governor Youngkin, but yes, I am.
Well, you're entitled to do that. I'm going to ask both of you this question. There's a lot of public-private partnership going on with government now in the country. It has been growing over the last few years. Is this something that your office or you engage in? I'll ask each of you. I'll start with you, General.
Well, I mean, I think it's how you frame it. I have regular meetings in my office with whether it's on opioids, whether it's on addiction, on so many different issues, because at the end of the day, the private sector is dealing with different structural demands and abilities that candidly the government can't meet. And so oftentimes they are the ones bringing innovative solutions. And I think you have to have that mindset. And so my staff would tell you one of the guideposts of my life is I always feel like I'm never the smartest person in any room I walk into. Smart enough to know when to hear good ideas. I would say over half of the legislative proposals we have that we're going to recommend to the General Assembly this upcoming year have come from meetings with those in the private sectors that have brought us issues that they have faced, that they have put on our radar. And so it is impossible, I'm sure you'd agree, we cannot be subject matter experts in all areas of the law. We oftentimes count on those from the private sector to make us aware, because government can oftentimes be clumsy in how they approach things. And so we need to be aware of how we can work with them. And that's the one thing I try to stress in my office. We want to work with, not against, the private sector.
General Frosh?
Yeah, so we represent every executive agency. We represent the governor, the General Assembly, the judiciary, and every single executive agency. So when the state is engaging in public-private partnerships, we're in the middle of it. And we give the best possible advice to the agency that's involved in the partnership, and we try to make sure that it runs smoothly. Not surprisingly, sometimes it doesn't. And we find ourselves on the other side of the V from the private partner. Maryland has had pretty good experience with PPPs. We have a toll plaza partnership that's been quite successful. We built a terminal in the Port of Baltimore, one of the biggest ports in the nation. That's been very successful. On the other hand, we have a light rail line that we're working on right now that has not been successful, let me put it that way. It is supposed to connect 4 metro stops in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Mark Line, Amtrak. It's a really great idea. I've strongly supported it when I was in the General Assembly as well as Attorney General, but it has not done well. For a long period of time, work was stopped in the middle. It's many years overdue. It's not going to be finished until 2026, or at least that's what they're projecting right now. And it's several $billions over budget. And the original general contractor walked off the job. It created enormous challenges for the state, for our office, and we have to sort through all of those issues. But sometimes those public-private partnerships are the best ways to get big infrastructure projects done, and we try to make them as successful as we possibly can.
Well, that's certainly a growing area for all of us, and I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. And that role of representing the government agencies, I don't know, do you do that in Virginia?
Yeah, we do. We represent every single state agencies and try to provide both a level playing field and, let's say, clear-eye analysis. The core thing for me in public-private partnership is always remember that they are partnerships, and part of my role as AG is making sure the public is protected.
Do each of you represent these agencies in most of their litigation, and you're both shaking your head, you do?
Yep.
And that's something we forget a lot. We talk about UDAP and the things you bring on your own, but that's a big part of most Attorney General's offices. Organized retail crime, that's a big issue right now, the smash and grab issue. Is that something that you're seeing a lot of, General Miyares? Are you addressing that?
Yeah, that is a huge issue right now in Virginia. We actually have another meeting of our organized retail crime task force is meeting actually tomorrow, bringing all the stakeholders. Right now, I mean, it has been said that poverty can produce crime, but I also believe crime produces poverty. 2/3 of all new jobs are created by small businesses. Small businesses don't locate in areas that are high crime. And so I think it is absolutely critical and the idea that somehow we kind of had this notion that there's victimless crimes. I heard that a lot the last couple of years. The reality is that's not. If you're a small business owner with small margins and an average retail crime theft can be, they can steal $2,000 worth of merchandise in under 30 seconds. I don't know how they do it, but they can. And in the reality that it's victimless, when I had a meeting on human trafficking task force, they said one of the ways they've seen an explosion of how they're paying for a lot of the online sex work advertising, the way they pay for it are stolen gift cards from large retail. That's how they get around and how it's so hard to track. And so the idea that somehow, just because it's quote a larceny crime is somehow victimless, the reality is it feeds into so many other areas. And so working with the different stakeholders of how we're going to push back, I think has been critical. It's something that we've taken in Virginia. We have our task force. We're about to come out with a series of recommendations for the General Assembly next year, but it's something that we have seen in Virginia. It used to be petty larceny third was a felony. They got rid of it. They also got rid of a lot. They changed the threshold. And so it has become increasingly in certain areas very, very difficult. And then candidly, you have some areas where you have certain Commonwealth's attorneys, what they call them in Virginia and other areas, district attorneys, you have certain Commonwealth's attorneys that won't prosecute certain categories of crime, and that has created a real problem for those in the retail space because they just can't operate. They can't operate in that environment, and that is part of what I say is clarity. Part of what providing clarity is the rule of law, and so businesses know if they operate in an environment, they're going to feel protected. If they don't feel protected, candidly, they're not going to stay.
General Frosh, you address that issue?
Yes, so in Maryland, most of the crime is prosecuted by the local prosecutors called state's attorneys in each one of the counties. But when I was sworn in, I created an organized crime unit. And honestly, the focus has been violent crime. And we dig deeper than the local state's attorneys. We can sit on a case, we can do wiretaps, we can do undercover operations. And what we found was some of these smash and grab operations fit very nicely into our gang statute. And so we've been able to go after some of the really larger organizations. I think there was one where we had 10 or 15 defendants we were able to indict. And what they did, and I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of an operation, but they go into high-end stores and they're all over the store, and all of a sudden, they're picking up high-end merchandise and just walking out of the store. And employees are told, you cannot try to stop them. It's dangerous, and we don't want the liability for you or our customers. And so they're able to walk away. That's the bad news. The good news is most of them have security cameras, and through the use of those, as well as social media, because not surprisingly, these folks want to sell the merchandise they're stealing. So they post it on Facebook and they post it on Instagram and other places. And they use that partly to brag, but also partly to sell. And so we were able to take down one of the larger operations with that kind of information and investigation.
Well, now, before we go to some questions in a couple of minutes, I would like to have your reflections on your tenure. In this case, we have one of the more junior guys, the freshman here, and then we have Frosh with 8 years. Let's go with the junior guy first. No, let's go with the older, the longer serving one. That's fair. He's got more to reflect on.
Yes.
So let's go to Maryland and say, what, General Frosh, can you, looking back on your tenure, think about that in general that you convey about the job of the Attorney General, and what you think are some of the most important accomplishments of your tenure of 8 years?
Well, I think we talked about this for a second outside, Bill, and I said it's the best job I've ever had. I mean, you're the manager of really one of the biggest, if not the biggest, law firm in the state, and it's interesting, it's challenging. The good news is you don't have to write the briefs and do the research most of the time. It helps every once in a while if you look stuff up. But you have, in our case, 500 lawyers who are running around doing extremely important work. And the challenge for them is trying to make me look good. But the opportunities are enormous. I mean, first of all, we strive to do excellent legal work for all of our clients. We have affirmative cases that we try to bring, and overall, it's an extremely effective tool to protect our citizens, to improve their lives, and to deliver justice. And we're working every day in just our advisory capacity, but also in our we handle all the criminal appeals in the state. We prosecute, as I mentioned a moment ago, some of the most violent, some of the most dangerous people in the state, and we protect consumers. So for me, it's been extremely rewarding and fulfilling, and it's just been a wonderful experience.
Well, now, you've been in office a year. What kind of observations can you make? Was there anything that surprised you in the year that you've been there?
Well, I get to wake up in the morning and sue the federal government. That's kind of a fun, that's probably one of the things that has surprised me about the job, is just how much of litigation we are at the federal level. And I actually think it's one of the signs, candidly, of a broken democracy, has been the explosion of the administrative state, where you have all these unelected regulatory boards. They promulgate these regulations that have the full force of impact of a law, but your congressman and your senator, they never vote on them. And your governor can complain about them, but effectively the only people that can stop them are your state attorneys general. And I think that puts a special onus on it of the responsibility you have. That has been somewhat of a surprise. I really do view the people that work in my office as public servants. Several people, in particular my senior staff, have left very lucrative private sector jobs, some of them making a sixth of what they were making, to come work for me. I don't think their spouses are very happy with me, but they really are. That's because they're passionate about giving back to the general public, and so it has been a joy to work with them. And essentially, you wear so many different hats. We have 21 sections in our office, everything from civil rights to environmental law to major crimes to consumer protection. You can imagine the meetings you have when you meet with your section chiefs are going to be very, very different on major crimes or special investigations versus, say, on utility law. And I think as a result of that, to your point, every day is different, but it's also a joy because you work with some extraordinary people. And I would probably say that has been both the people that I work with, and then it has been a surprise. I was in the General Assembly, and I missed those relationships, the camaraderie, and being able to recreate that and have those people have been fantastic. But I also think I'm very blessed to candidly work with Governor Youngkin, and we're not just of the same party, but we have very, very similar outlook and mindset. And so I have been told from other previous AGs in Virginia that have been in my seat that have had members of the opposite party that it's not quite, it's a little bit contentious. That part has been a joy to work with him as well.
How many attorneys roughly do you have in Virginia? I think General Frosh and I were talking about this having around 500.
Yeah, we have about over 700 on our staff. We have over, I think, 400 plus, almost 500 attorneys. And then when you count staff, we're at 700 and change.
Well, I know as Attorney General in Florida, we had 400, and I think they're now about 500. And the impressive thing that both of you alluded to is the fact you have this really high-quality attorney willing to work in the Attorney General's office. And it's not like you just get people because you don't pay as much as you on the outside. They like what they do. I think that's what you're both saying. We have time for about 5 minutes or so for questions from the audience. Does anybody have a question? Way back in the back, I can't see very well. Your hand's up, far back, straight ahead. Wait, back by the painting. I can't see who's back there. Yeah, you got a microphone? There you go.
Thank you. Gentlemen, counterfeit drugs has become a multi-billion-dollar operation. People counterfeit drugs which look exactly like the real one, but if the person takes the drug, they can die. Do either of your offices have assets or on your agenda pursuing those who sell or distribute counterfeit drugs?
I mean, the question on counterfeit drugs, we had 14 or 15-year-old teenagers die in Prince William County because they were at a party and they thought they were taking a Percocet, and it was fentanyl. We had another teenage girl in Warren County who died who thought she was taking a Xanax. And so we have seen, I don't use the word crisis. And a lot of politicians do. I think the term is overused. What has happened in the last 12 months, we've had 108,000 overdoses, primarily fentanyl and opioid. And you hear those numbers, and it's hard to put into context. We lost 50,000 men and women in Vietnam over 15 years. It's like 2 Vietnam Wars in 12 months. And so it is a huge, huge challenge. I think every state attorney general, I know that we had a bipartisan letter we sent to the administration, asked them to declare fentanyl WMD. What's happened with these dealers, though, and this shows you how perverse the cycle of addiction can be, they actually have an incentive to kill their clients. Because the other individuals hear that someone overdoses, that must mean they have the pure stuff. And so it is unlike anything that law enforcement has seen, and it has erupted in the last couple of years. And so, we did a lot of things to get through COVID, but we also isolated for 2 years. If you ever dealt with anybody that's dealt with depression or addiction, they'll tell you social isolation, worst thing you could do to anybody. We did that for 300 million Americans. That's not me Monday morning quarterbacking. That's just observing. That's what we've gone through. So you have the counterfeit narcotics that's ending up in killing people through fentanyl. But it is a huge issue in Virginia. But I don't know,
General Frosh?
So specifically with respect to fentanyl, we've indicted gangs this year. One of our series of indictments turned up 5 kilograms of fentanyl, pure fentanyl, enough to kill about 5 million people. Another was, I think it was 2 kilograms of fentanyl. It's high on our list. The actual, I can't talk about anything that's in process, obviously, right, but it is on our radar that folks are counterfeiting commercial drugs and trying to sell those. And I mean, I can tell you that, well, I can't comment on anything we're doing. If we could find situations where that's going on, we can identify the folks who are making the sales, who are manufacturing or creating the fake drugs. That would be a high priority for us.
Counterfeiting is a big issue for most attorney general's offices. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but fentanyl certainly does. Another question. Who has one? Somebody else has got to have a question out there besides me. I can ask one, but I'm looking for you guys to do this. Who's got one? Here. Rob? General McKenna? Yeah. You got a microphone?
Thank you, Bill. So, General Miyares, General Frosh, thanks for your service, first of all. The question I have has to do with the public nuisance doctrine. It's an old common law doctrine, as you know, but in recent decades we've seen its use expanded. The opioid cases, in many instances, if not all of them, rely on a public nuisance theory. We're seeing public nuisance cited in climate change cases brought by governments. Do you see boundaries or limits on the use of public nuisance theory in cases that your offices have brought or may bring in the future?
Well, I can't think of one that we have brought. We have strong laws that, I mean, with respect to the opioid manufacturers, distributors, retailers, et cetera, suffice. In other words, our consumer protection laws are very strong and provide the kind of relief that we need. There's case law that supports it. The nuisance causes of action are more amorphous in Maryland, and I don't think we've had the need to add nuisance counts to any of our major cases yet. I wouldn't rule it out, but so far in those types of cases, our consumer protection laws have been absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Virginia Consumer Protection Act provides so much of the same guarantees that that you would get under a public nuisance doctrine. The problem is when people try to use that and expand it into a way that provides such uncertainty for businesses. So it's a tool, and like any other tool, it can be abused, and I don't want to see it abused.
Well, I will say this because it's Maryland over here, that Baltimore has one of the most famous public nuisance cases as a city going forward on climate change that may well be in the Supreme Court pretty soon. And
Yep.
it's an interesting example of how I think litigation myself is going to address public nuisance shortly in the appellate courts, because it's, as General McKenna said, a big issue. We're out of our time. We say they gave me another minute and 43, or what does that mean? Just a minute and 43 in between sessions, I guess. I think that's really what you want, Harold, is us to wrap up, isn't it? Yeah, all right. Well, first of all, last of all, I want to thank both of you, not only for your public service, which General McKenna just did, but for coming here today.
Yeah.
This is not as simple as it may sound. There's a little travel involved, even though it's in your neighborhood. It's not exactly like you're going downtown every day to do this. So thank you very much for it. Let's give them a round of applause.
Pleasure.